The water wave symbol of ancient Egypt has got many functions. One of its functions is obviously to represent the word water as Ma. And this symbol is a great one, but because Ma is a little bit of a confusing letter, it doesn't actually represent water in the writing system, the Medu Neter. In the writing system, this symbol generally means N, the letter N, meaning of or to, and then mixed with other letters or other values, it can have a completely different word than that. But when you usually see this letter, it will be of. For example, like I said, Medu Neter means the writing systems of the gods or the writing system, but the word Ra'unkumat means the spoken language of Egypt. We can compare this word Ra'unkumat to Ra'unkush, which means the language of Kush or the tongue of Kush or the mouth of Kush, basically meaning that this is the way that people speak in different locations. So basically, that's a simple Egyptian thing they do, which is say the language and then you say of a place. Now, this is common everywhere. It's like the language of India, the language of Russia, the language of this. But this does not mean that that would be the official name for the uh, language necessarily, because of course they had many other names that they used that a lot of them came from the locals of those nations. So they wouldn't just be like, oh, Ran, Syria, Ran, blah, 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 Ran. It would also be names that come from other places and even their own, meaning the language of those regions. Now, before we explain something very simple, let's first make a warning. One, you will not always see these written this way. This is kind of written in a way that English speakers would understand, which is writing the letters one after the other. This is not always going to be the case, especially if you talk about proper nouns and if you're talking about um, on walls and stuff. But in here, let's just keep it simple. Now, it is easy to see why these people language would be when influencing other languages like Proto-Sinaitic. It is easy to see why they would abandon a lot of these and just create the alphabet or the pre-alphabet at the time, because of course this is a very difficult language, firstly to write and then also to understand. But even when you understand it, there's still a higher level of it, which is called hieratic, which again, very difficult. For example, you can see that there's water waves in Ra'unkumat and Ra'unkush, but there are no water waves in Medu Neter, even though Medu Neter has got the letter M and it's got the letter N. Now, again, like I told you, the water wave for M would be completely different. It would actually be the owl, but you can see here that it's not the owl isn't even there, and this is because it's very different. So it's not like English where you learn 26 letters and you're done. Here, you're actually learning a bunch of symbols, and then context matters when it comes to the symbols, which is again very difficult compared to the alphabet system, which is why people would switch to the alphabets. Now, you see here the water waves. In both of these, they mean of. Ra, n, kumat. Ra, n, kush. So again, you can see that there's very little similarities between these words, even though the the, the phrases is the same. So the first one, ra, which means the mouth of, mouth, and then the wave of, and then gush, and then kumat in the other one. So you can see here that the water wave means of or towards. So the water wave is simple, right? And that's easy because you can tell by context that it's not water. Well, there's actually an easier way to tell if it's water, which thank God they came up with, which is when they represent water, they put three water waves, which means that will be ma, meaning water, but also it will be connected to other words. So if you see three water waves, it's not going to be as simple as you think because it's not always going to refer to water, because even water itself can be used as a character, or we call it a character, but these are three separate characters. But it can be used as a character to join a bigger word. For example, if we look at this, it's got four water waves. Now, what could this word possibly mean? Well, you'll be surprised by the meaning. It doesn't mean a lot of water. It does not mean of water. It doesn't mean of, and it doesn't mean water, 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 water. It actually means a little person, meaning that now you're just taking the value of the word. So now this word is nema or nemu, and it means a little person. So you can't tell from this that it has nothing to do with water. It's nemu, meaning a little person. So the N in the beginning is now ne, and then the ma, which means water, is mu or ma, depending on how they actually pronounced it. But it's nemu, standardized. It could even be namu, or it could be nama, or it could be depending again. But for just going to use the one that they use as the common one, which is nemu, but it could be nama, it could be um nemu or nama, nema. So, but we'll stick with nemu. Now the next word is an interesting word, and the word is rin, which means name. And rin is that one in the beginning, R, and N. And we've already used this before in Ran Kumat. Remember, we used Ra, but without that little, now it's Rin rather than Ra'in. It's Rin, meaning name. This is important because that Ran Kumat, you could see, you could get confused because you might think it's written name of Kumat, but it's not. But this is name itself. Now, it does look simple enough, of course, Rin, name, but it can be complicated because this could also mean ani, which means a type of animal, I think a donkey, but also means a small animal, like a baby animal. Uh, Another thing is, it's not always going to mean this because in some cases it can mean rim, and depending on the word, it can mean something different. In other words, RMN rather than just RN. So be careful of that. Now, just because a letter or a character comes in front of another or on top of another doesn't mean you have to read it that way. This is why context matters. For example, in this word here, the one at the bottom is the number 3, as you can see with the 3 strokes. And the one at the top is obviously N. We know this now. So what is this word? Is it ni? No, it's in. And what does it mean? It means together. Now there's another together, but it means together, meaning two people together. And it's also close to this. It's any. and it has two of these strokes but diagonal rather than straight, and it means both of us together, two together. Now this takes us back here, and now you can recognize probably more symbols like the number one, and you can see here Rangumat, the language of the Egyptians, and Ra in Kush, the language of the Kushites. And you can see there the tally mark, and you can see RM, Kuka, M is the owl, A and T being the um, upside down semicircle or bread. And then you see there, Ra, mm, Kush, Kus is how they would say it, but Ra and Kush, or probably Kusu. But yeah, so as we go further, we should look at different words, but I think this is already overwhelming enough for a lot of people. But it is interesting that this happens. Now, I will say that with this specific one, it's usually used for humans. So the language is related to humans, you'll find it, and blah, blah, blah. But you will find words like the water's edge, where you will see this being used, this symbol being used. The mouth with the line at the bottom, you will see the words like water's edge using these type of words. But again, it's a complicated language. They don't call it Medu Nature for no reason. You would have to be at another level. Now, here's something before I leave you that you have to think about deeply. If you were to learn this, maybe 10% of this language, you know 10% more than most ancient Egyptians, as most ancient Egyptians were illiterate. You know 10% more about their writing system than they do. Think about that. That connects you deeper to the elite than those people who were alive back then. But it does also bring up the question of what exactly were the ancient Egyptians that were illiterate doing with most of the time? What were they believing? Were they aware of how, let's say, formal these guys were with their speech and how it worked? Because remember, we can tell if you look at modern times, right? If you look at any times, really, but if you look at modern times, you can see that there's a difference between the people at the top, the way they speak, and the people at the bottom. And of course, the ancient Egyptians, the ones who wrote, they tried to keep it formal, tried to be highly this and that. So, what would the ancient Egyptians, the normal ones, had sounded like if they were just written exactly as they were? My guess is very